The bitter December wind slashed across Nora Davis's face like the sting of her father's palm, her tears freezing against her cheeks as she pounded desperately on the door of the only home she'd ever known. "Please, Father, it was an accident," she cried, her voice swallowed by the howling blizzard that had swept suddenly through Beaver, Utah on this cruel evening in 1878. "You've disgraced this family for the last time." Her father's voice roared from inside the sturdy wooden house. "No daughter of mine refuses a marriage proposal from a town councilman to chase foolish dreams of independence." Nora wrapped her arms around herself, her thin cotton dress offering pitiful protection against the merciless cold. The snow was falling faster now, already several inches deep and accumulating quickly. She had run from the dinner table after her father's announcement that she would marry Councilman Elliott, a man 30 years her senior, within the week. Her defiance had been the final transgression in a long line of rebellious acts that had tested her father's patience since her mother's death 3 years prior. "Mother would never have allowed this," Nora shouted, her voice cracking with desperation. "Your mother is dead, girl. And you'll soon be too if you don't accept your place." The finality in his tone told her everything. At 21 years of age, Nora Davis had become homeless in the middle of Utah's worst winter storm in decades. Her 2 younger sisters, barely teenagers, peered fearfully through the curtains until their father roughly pulled them away. Nora stumbled backward, nearly falling in the deepening snow. She had nothing but the clothes on her back, a small locket containing her mother's portrait, and the stubborn pride that had been her undoing. The wind cut through her like a knife, and she knew she needed shelter fast, or she would not survive the night. The town of Beaver sat nestled in a valley, its buildings now barely visible through the swirling white. Nora staggered toward Main Street, her legs already growing numb. The businesses were closed for the evening, windows dark, doors locked tight against the storm. Her father's influence in town was considerable. Who would dare help the disgraced daughter of Judge Harrison Davis? Tears blurred her vision as she struggled forward. Her home was at the northern edge of town, and she was now heading south, away from the familiar and toward the unknown. The wind pushed against her, as if the very elements were conspiring with her father to punish her disobedience. After what felt like hours but was likely only 20 minutes, Nora spotted a light in the distance. It flickered like a beacon, a lonely star guiding her through the raging storm. As she drew closer, she recognized it as the old Campbell place, a modest ranch house set back from the main road on a sprawling property that extended into the foothills. The Campbell family had sold the ranch years ago, and Nora had heard rumors that a newcomer had purchased it. She knew nothing of the current owner, only that he kept to himself and rarely came into town. Desperation drove her forward. Her fingers had lost all feeling and her lips had taken on a bluish tinge. If she didn't find shelter soon, she would freeze to death. The ranch house stood about 100 yards from the main road, a formidable journey through knee-deep snow. Nora pushed forward, each step requiring tremendous effort as her sodden skirts grew heavier with ice and snow. As she approached, she could see smoke curling from the chimney, promising warmth within. A small barn stood nearby, and a corral where horses would graze in better weather, summoning the last of her strength. Nora climbed the 3 steps to the porch and pounded on the door with a trembling fist. "Hello," she called, her voice weak against the howling wind. "Please, is anyone there? I need help." For a terrible moment, there was no response, and Nora feared she had come all this way for nothing. Then, just as her knees began to buckle, she heard movement inside. The door swung open, revealing a tall man silhouetted against the warm glow of a fire. "Good Lord," a deep voice exclaimed. "What in heaven's name are you doing out in this storm?" Nora opened her mouth to explain, but no words came. The world tilted sideways as her frozen body finally gave in to exhaustion. The last thing she remembered was strong arms catching her before she hit the floor. Warmth. That was the first sensation that returned to Nora as consciousness slowly crept back. She was wrapped in something soft and heavy, blankets, she realized. A fire crackled nearby, and she could feel its heat on her face. Her fingers and toes tingled painfully as circulation returned. "Easy now," that same deep voice said as she struggled to open her eyes. "You're safe, but you've got a touch of frostbite. Best not move too quickly." Nora blinked, her vision gradually focusing on the man sitting across from her. He was perhaps 30 years old, with dark hair that curled slightly at the ends and a strong jawline shadowed with stubble. His eyes, a striking shade of green, watched her with concern. "Where am I?" Nora managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "My ranch about a mile south of Beaver proper," he replied, rising to pour something from a pot hanging over the fire. "Name's Victor Fairchild. Most folks around here just call me Fairchild when they call me anything at all." He approached with a steaming mug, crouching beside the sofa where she lay. "Can you sit up a bit? This will help warm you from the inside." Nora nodded, struggling to a semi-upright position. Her dress had been replaced by a man's shirt that engulfed her slender frame, and thick woolen socks covered her feet. Under different circumstances, she might have been scandalized, but survival had a way of prioritizing propriety. "Did you?" she began, looking down at her changed attire. Victor shook his head quickly. "No, madam. I wrapped you in blankets and built up the fire. Once you were warmer, I left some dry clothes and stepped out. You must have changed in your half-conscious state. I'd never." He cleared his throat, a flush creeping up his neck. "I respect a lady's dignity." Nora accepted the mug gratefully, the rich aroma of beef broth rising with the steam. "Thank you, Mr. Fairchild. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't opened your door." "Victor," he corrected, returning to his chair. "And I reckon what would have happened isn't worth contemplating. The question is what drove you out into a blizzard dressed for spring rather than winter." Nora sipped the broth, letting it thaw her from within before answering. "My father locked me out," she said finally, the words painful to speak aloud. "I refused to marry the man he chose for me, and he decided I was no longer welcome in his home." Victor's expression darkened. "In this weather, that's more than harsh, it's criminal." He studied her face. "You're Judge Davis's daughter, aren't you? I've seen you in town a few times." Nora nodded, surprised he had noticed her. "Yes, Nora Davis." "Well, Miss Davis, you're welcome to stay here until the storm passes. I've got plenty of room, and no one should be forced out into a night like this." "You're very kind, but I wouldn't want to impose." "It's no imposition," Victor interrupted, his tone gentle but firm. "This old house has been too quiet for too long anyway. Besides, I can't in good conscience send you back out there, and I suspect you've nowhere else to go." The truth of his words struck Nora hard. Where would she go? Her father's influence extended throughout Beaver. Few would risk his displeasure by taking her in. "Thank you," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "I promise I'll find somewhere else as soon as the weather clears." Victor rose and added another log to the fire. "No rush," he said, his back to her. "This storm might last days, according to my aching knee. Old injury," he explained, noticing her questioning look. "Acts up something fierce before bad weather." As if to confirm his prediction, the wind howled louder outside, rattling the windows in their frames. "How long have you lived in Beaver?" Nora asked, curious about this solitary man who had shown her such kindness. "Going on 2 years now," Victor replied, settling back into his chair. Bought this place after leaving the cattle drives. Decided it was time to put down some roots. You were a drover, Victor nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. 10 years on the trails. Started when I was 18, fresh from my parents' farm in Missouri. Drove herds from Texas up to Kansas, Colorado, even as far as Montana once. Nora tried to imagine this man's life on the open trail, so different from her sheltered existence in Beaver. What made you stop? Victor absently rubbed his left knee. This, partially. Took a bad fall during a stampede 3 years ago. But mostly, I just grew tired of the wandering life, wanted something of my own. He glanced around the modest but comfortable room. It ain't much compared to what you're used to, but it's mine. I think it's lovely, Nora said sincerely, taking in the simple furnishings, the bookshelves laden with volumes, the handmade quilt covering her. It feels like a home. Something flickered in Victor's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or gratification. High praise from a judge's daughter, he said, but there was no mockery in his tone. Former judge's daughter, Nora corrected, her voice catching. I don't imagine I'll be welcome back. Victor leaned forward, his expression serious. Miss Davis, Nora, I want you to understand something. Whatever happens after this storm, you're safe here for now. You belong here, at least until you decide where you want to go next. The simple statement, delivered with such certainty, broke something inside her. The tears she'd been fighting spilled over, and soon she was sobbing in earnest. Years of living under her father's oppressive rule finding release in this stranger's kindness. Victor didn't attempt to stop her tears or offer empty platitudes. He simply handed her a handkerchief and stoked the fire, giving her the dignity of privacy while remaining present. When her tears finally subsided, Nora felt emptied and somehow lighter. I'm sorry, she said, dabbing at her eyes. Don't be, Victor replied. Sometimes tears are the only sensible response to an insensible situation. Nora managed a watery smile. You're very wise for a cowboy, Mr. Fairchild. Victor, he reminded her with a slight grin. And wisdom's cheap when you've made as many mistakes as I have. Now you should rest. We can talk more in the morning. Nora nodded, suddenly aware of how exhausted she truly was. As Victor turned to leave, she called out, Thank you, not just for the shelter but for. She gestured vaguely, unable to articulate the depth of her gratitude. Victor paused at the doorway. You're welcome, Nora. Sleep well. When Nora awoke the next morning, sunlight was streaming through the windows, creating golden patterns on the wooden floor. For a moment, she was disoriented, the unfamiliar surroundings confusing her sleep-addled mind. Then the events of the previous night came rushing back, her father's ultimatum, the storm, the kind cowboy who had taken her in. She sat up slowly, relieved to find that most of the pain in her extremities had subsided. The fire had burned low, but the house remained comfortably warm. Victor's shirt hung past her knees, and she wrapped the blanket around her shoulders as she stood. The main room of the ranch house was simply but tastefully furnished, with a large stone fireplace, comfortable chairs, and bookshelves lining one wall. Through a doorway she could see a kitchen and presumably bedrooms lay beyond. Good morning, Victor's voice startled her. He stood in the kitchen doorway, a cup of coffee in hand. I was beginning to wonder if you'd sleep the day away. Not that I'd blame you after what you've been through. What time is it? Nora asked, suddenly self-conscious of her appearance and attire. Just past 10, Victor replied, gesturing toward the kitchen. There's coffee, and I've got eggs and bacon keeping warm if you're hungry. Nora's stomach growled in response, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since yesterday's interrupted dinner. That sounds wonderful, I should. Do I have any clothes? Yours are hanging by the kitchen stove, Victor said. Should be dry by now. though I can't vouch for their condition after the snow. I've laid out a few things that might fit you better than that shirt in the spare bedroom. Second door on the left down the hall. Thank you, Nora said, clutching the blanket tighter around her shoulders. I'll just... Take your time, Victor said, understanding her discomfort. I'll be out in the barn checking on the animals. The storm's passed, but we got nearly 2 feet of snow. Going to be a while before the roads are passable. Once Victor had pulled on his coat and boots and headed outside, Nora made her way to the spare bedroom. It was small but tidy, with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a small window overlooking the snow-covered landscape. On the bed lay a pair of trousers that had been taken in with rough stitches, a flannel shirt, and a woolen sweater. The clothes were still too large, but by rolling up the sleeves and using one of her hair ribbons as a belt, Nora managed to make them serviceable. She found a cracked mirror hanging on the wall and grimaced at her reflection. Her auburn hair hung in tangles around her face, and her green eyes were still puffy from crying. She did her best to smooth her hair with her fingers, tying it back with another ribbon before venturing to the kitchen. True to his word, Victor had left a plate of eggs and bacon keeping warm near the stove. Nora devoured the simple meal, suddenly ravenous. The coffee was strong and bitter, but she welcomed its warmth and the alertness it brought. She had just finished washing her dish when Victor returned, stomping snow from his boots at the door. "The animals are all fine," he reported, hanging his coat on a peg. "Roads impassable for wagons, but I could probably get a horse through to town if needed." "Is that necessary?" Nora asked, her heart sinking at the thought of returning to Beaver so soon. Victor studied her for a moment, seeming to read her apprehension. "Not unless you think someone will be worried about you." Nora shook her head. "My father made his position clear. And I have no close friends who would notice my absence." It was a sad admission, but true. Judge Davis had kept his daughters isolated, particularly after their mother's death. "Then we'll wait for the snow to melt some," Victor decided. "Though I should let you know I wasn't expecting company. Provisions might get a bit thin if we're snowed in too long." "I know how to stretch supplies," Nora offered. "My mother taught me to cook and manage a household before she passed." Victor's expression softened. "I'm sorry about your mother. Must have been hard on you." "It was," Nora admitted, surprised by his perceptiveness. "Father changed after she died. He was always stern, but he became harsh, controlling. And your sisters, Emma and Charlotte, are 14 and 16. They've always been more compliant than me," Nora said, a hint of bitterness creeping into her voice. "Father calls me willful. Mother called me spirited." Victor's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "I suspect your mother had the right of it." He poured himself a fresh cup of coffee. "So what was it that got you thrown out, if you don't mind my asking?" Nora leaned against the kitchen counter, studying the worn floorboards. "Councilman Elliott asked for my hand in marriage. Father accepted on my behalf without consulting me, when I objected at dinner last night." She trailed off, the humiliation of the moment still fresh. "Father said I had embarrassed him for the last time, that I should be grateful anyone would want a troublesome girl like me." Victor's hand tightened around his coffee mug. "Elliott, the balding fellow with the gold watch chain who's always at the mercantile counting inventory." Nora nodded. "He's 53 years old and has buried 2 wives already." "And your father thought that was a suitable match?" Victor's incredulity was evident. "Elliott is wealthy and influential," Nora explained. "Father has political aspirations beyond being a circuit judge, and I'm of an age where I should have been married years ago, according to him." "Seems to me that who you marry should be your decision," Victor said, his voice rough with disapproval. "That's precisely what I told him," Nora replied, a spark of her old defiance returning. along with some rather unladylike opinions about Councilman Elliott's character. Victor's laugh was unexpected and warm. I'd have paid good money to see the councilman's face. He sobered quickly. Though I'm sorry it led to such dire consequences for you. Nora shrugged, trying to appear braver than she felt. Perhaps it was inevitable. Father and I have been at odds since Mother died. He wants obedient daughters who will make advantageous matches and bring him social connections. I want. What do you want, Nora? Victor asked gently when she hesitated. Nora looked up, meeting his gaze directly. Freedom. The chance to decide my own future, to marry for love if I marry at all, to use the education my mother insisted upon, perhaps as a teacher. She laughed softly, self-deprecatingly. Foolish dreams for a woman, I know. Not foolish, Victor contradicted. Brave. Takes courage to want something different from what the world expects of you. His simple understanding touched her deeply. Thank you for saying that. Few would agree. An awkward silence fell between them, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the occasional gust of wind outside. Well, Victor said finally, we've got at least a few days before the road's clear. Might as well make ourselves useful. He gestured to the clothes she wore. Those fit all right. Nora glanced down at her borrowed attire. They'll do, thank you. Whose are they? A shadow crossed Victor's face. My sister's. She stayed with me for a while when I first bought the place. Something in his tone warned Nora against pressing further. I'll take good care of them, she promised instead. Victor nodded, seeming relieved. I need to repair a section of fencing that came down in the storm. The snow's deep, but the work can't wait. I could help, Nora offered. Victor raised an eyebrow. You know about mending fences? No, Nora admitted, but I can learn. I'm stronger than I look, and I'm not afraid of hard work. Victor seemed to consider her offer, then nodded. All right. But you'll need warmer clothes. There's a spare coat and boots by the door. They'll be too big, but they'll keep you from freezing. The next few hours were some of the most physically demanding of Nora's life. The snow reached past her knees in places, making each step a struggle. Victor showed remarkable patience, teaching her how to hold the fence posts steady while he drove them into the ground, how to string the wire without cutting herself, how to test the tension. By midday, they had repaired half the damaged section, and Nora's muscles ached in ways she'd never experienced. Yet there was something deeply satisfying about the tangible results of their labor. We should take a break, Victor suggested, noticing her fatigue despite her attempts to hide it. Get some food and warm up. Back inside, Victor heated a pot of beans and sliced some bread while Nora thawed her cold fingers by the fire. You did well out there, Victor said as they ate. Most city folks would have given up after the first hour. I'm not most city folks, Nora replied with a small smile. Besides, Beaver hardly qualifies as a city. Compared to some places I've been, it might as well be San Francisco, Victor chuckled. As they ate, Victor shared stories of his years on the cattle drives, tales of stampedes and river crossings, of drovers and trail cooks, of the vast open spaces of the West. Nora found herself captivated by his adventures and by the thoughtful way he told them, never boasting, always acknowledging both the beauty and the hardship of the life he'd led. What about your family? Nora asked as they finished their meal. Are they still in Missouri? Victor's expression closed slightly. My parents died in a fire when I was 19, just after I'd left for my first cattle drive. My sister Clara was the only family I had left. The past tense wasn't lost on Nora. I'm sorry, is she? She died 2 years ago, Victor said, his voice flat. Influenza. She came to stay with me when I bought this place, but she caught sick that first winter. Nothing I could do. That's why you came to Beaver. For a fresh start after losing her, Victor nodded, staring into his coffee. Clara was always the one with dreams, wanted a home, a family. I bought this place for her as much as for me." He shook his head. "Doesn't matter now." "It matters," Nora said softly. "Our loved ones shape us even after they're gone, maybe especially then." Victor looked up, surprise evident in his expression. That's exactly what Clara used to say." A connection sparked between them, a shared understanding born of loss. For a moment neither spoke, the silence companionable rather than awkward. Finally, Victor cleared his throat. "We should finish that fence before dark." The remainder of the day passed in shared labor, and by sunset, they had completed the repairs. Exhausted but satisfied, they returned to the house as the temperature began to plummet once more. That evening established a pattern that would continue for the next several days. The heavy snowfall kept them largely isolated, though Victor rode into town once for supplies, returning with news that the stagecoach had been delayed and the telegraph lines were down due to the storm. "Did you hear anything about my father?" Nora asked hesitantly when he returned. Victor hesitated. "There's talk," he admitted. "Word is that you ran off with some traveling salesman. Your father's telling folks he warned you against the man, but you wouldn't listen." Nora's face burned with indignation. "That's absurd. There was no salesman. He locked me out." "I believe you," Victor assured her, "but it's his word against yours and he's a judge. Did anyone ask about me?" "My sisters." Victor's expression softened with sympathy. "The store owner mentioned that your youngest sister asked if anyone had seen you, seemed worried." Tears stung Nora's eyes. "Poor Emma. She's always been sensitive." She blinked rapidly. "Did you tell anyone I'm here?" "No," Victor said firmly. "That's your business to share when and if you choose to. I just said I'd been keeping to myself at the ranch, waiting out the storm." "Thank you," Nora whispered, relief evident in her voice. As the days passed, they fell into a comfortable routine. Mornings were spent on outdoor chores, tending the horses, clearing paths through the snow, checking fences. Afternoons were devoted to indoor tasks, cooking, mending, and maintenance of the small ranch house. Evenings were for conversation by the fire, where they gradually shared more of their life stories. Nora learned that Victor had been a voracious reader since childhood, explaining the well-stocked bookshelves. He'd carried books with him even on cattle drives, enduring good-natured ribbing from his fellow drovers for his book learning. Victor discovered that Nora had a quick mind for numbers and strategy, consistently beating him at checkers and having an uncanny ability to calculate sums in her head, a skill her mother had encouraged despite her father's disapproval of unfeminine pursuits. On the 5th day after the storm, as they sat by the fire with cups of coffee, Victor broached the subject they'd both been avoiding. "The stage is running again," he said, his eyes on the flames rather than on her. "Road to town is clear enough for wagons now." Nora felt her stomach tighten. "I see. You're welcome to stay longer," Victor added quickly. "I'm not asking you to leave, just thought you should know your options are opening up." Nora set down her cup carefully. "I've been imposing on your hospitality for almost a week. I should make arrangements." "It's not an imposition," Victor interrupted, finally looking at her directly. "Having you here has been—" He paused, searching for words. "Pleasant, more than pleasant." A warmth that had nothing to do with the fire spread through Nora's chest. "I've felt the same," she admitted softly. Victor leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Nora, I know we haven't known each other long, but I want you to understand that you're welcome here for as long as you wish to stay. No expectations, no conditions." "Why?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. "Why would you do that for someone you barely know?" Victor was silent for a long moment. "Maybe because I know what it's like to have nowhere to go," he finally said. "Or maybe because in just a few days, You've brought more life to this place than it's seen since Clara died." He met her gaze steadily. "Or maybe because I enjoy your company and I'm not ready to return to solitude just yet." The honesty in his voice moved her deeply. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what the future holds, but I'm not ready to leave either." As they sat in comfortable silence, Nora realized with a mixture of surprise and certainty that something fundamental had changed within her over these few days. The desperation and fear that had driven her through the snowstorm had been replaced by a tentative hope that perhaps she could forge a path different from the one her father had decreed for her. The sound of hoofbeats outside shattered the peaceful moment. Victor rose quickly, moving to the window. "Rider coming," he reported, frowning. "Single horse moving fast." Nora joined him at the window, her heart suddenly racing. Through the glass she could make out a figure on horseback approaching rapidly, a dark silhouette against the white landscape. "It's Sheriff Patterson," Victor identified the rider as he drew closer. Something must be wrong for him to ride out this far. A knot of dread formed in Nora's stomach. Had her father sent the sheriff to fetch her back? Could he force her to return at 21 years of age? Victor must have read the fear in her expression. "Don't worry," he said quietly. "No one's taking you anywhere against your will, not while you're under my roof." The simple declaration steadied her. She nodded, straightening her shoulders as Victor moved to open the door. Sheriff Tom Patterson was a burly man with a thick mustache and weathered face. He dismounted stiffly, tipping his hat to Victor. "Fairchild, sorry to disturb you." "No disturbance, Sheriff," Victor replied evenly. "Something amiss in town." Patterson's eyes shifted beyond Victor, widening slightly when he spotted Nora standing in the doorway. "Miss Davis," he acknowledged with visible surprise. "So the rumors are true." "What rumors would those be, Sheriff?" Victor asked, his tone still casual but with an underlying edge. "That you've been harboring Judge Davis's daughter," Patterson said, his expression growing stern. "There are some in town saying you abducted her during the storm." "That's absurd," Nora exclaimed, stepping forward. "Mr. Fairchild saved my life. I would have frozen to death if not for him." Patterson held up a placating hand. "Now, Miss Davis, I'm not here to make accusations, just trying to get to the bottom of a situation that's causing quite a stir in Beaver." "The situation is simple," Victor said firmly. "Miss Davis needed shelter during the blizzard. I provided it. She's been recovering here since. Nothing improper has occurred." "Be that as it may," Patterson continued, "your father is demanding your return, Miss Davis, says you had a misunderstanding." Nora's hands clenched at her sides. "It was no misunderstanding. He locked me out in a blizzard because I refused to marry a man old enough to be my father. He told me I was no longer welcome in his home." The sheriff looked uncomfortable. "Family disputes aren't my business, Miss Davis." "But your father is a respected judge, and he's claiming you're being held here against your will." "That's a lie," Nora stated firmly. "I'm here by choice, Sheriff Patterson. I'm 21 years old, a legal adult. My father has no authority to demand my return." Patterson shifted his weight, clearly caught in an awkward position. "Judge Davis seems to think otherwise. He's threatening to bring charges against Fairchild here for interference with parental authority and other matters." "What other matters?" Victor asked sharply. The sheriff's gaze slid away. "There's talk about your relationship with Miss Davis, improper suggestions." Nora felt heat rise to her cheeks, partly embarrassment, partly fury. "How dare he? Mr. Fairchild has been a perfect gentleman. He's given me shelter and shown me kindness when my own father cast me out." "I believe you, miss," Patterson said, his voice softening slightly. "But you know how people talk, and your father has considerable influence in this county." Victor stepped forward, his expression resolute. Sheriff, Miss Davis is welcome in my home for as long as she chooses to stay. If Judge Davis has concerns, he's welcome to discuss them with me directly or through the proper legal channels. But I won't be intimidated by threats or rumors." Patterson studied Victor for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Fair enough. I'll relay your position." He turned to Nora. "Miss Davis, for what it's worth, I'm glad you're safe. That was a terrible storm." "Thank you, Sheriff," Nora replied, her voice steadier than she felt. After Patterson departed, Nora and Victor stood in silence, the implications of the sheriff's visit hanging between them. "I've brought trouble to your door," Nora finally said, distress evident in her voice. "My father won't stop. He can't bear to lose control or be defied." Victor's expression was thoughtful rather than worried. "Your father doesn't strike me as a man who likes public scandal. If you stand your ground, he may eventually back down rather than risk his reputation." "You don't know him," Nora said, shaking her head. "He'll find a way to force me back, or worse, to punish you for helping me." "Let him try," Victor replied with quiet confidence. "I've faced worse than an angry judge with wounded pride." He hesitated, then added gently, "But if you feel it would be safer to leave to go somewhere else, I understand. I could help you get to Cedar City, maybe even Salt Lake. You could make a fresh start." The offer was generous, considerate, and the last thing Nora wanted. The realization struck her with surprising force. "Is that what you want, for me to leave?" Victor's green eyes met hers directly. "No," he said simply. "That's not what I want at all." The honesty in his voice made her breath catch. "Then I'll stay," Nora decided. "At least until we see what my father's next move will be." That evening, as they prepared dinner together in the kitchen, Nora felt a shift in their relationship. The sheriff's visit had brought their situation into stark relief. They were no longer just two people sheltering from a storm, but were now aligned against external pressure. "Tell me about your dreams," Victor said unexpectedly as they washed dishes side by side. "Before all this happened, what did you imagine for your future?" Nora considered the question, her hands moving mechanically in the soapy water. "I wanted to teach," she said finally. "My mother taught me to value education. She always said knowledge was the one thing no one could take from you." "She sounds like a wise woman." "She was," Nora agreed, a familiar sadness touching her at the memory. "After she died, I thought perhaps I could honor her by teaching others. The school teacher in Beaver was talking about retiring, and I'd hoped." She trailed off with a small shrug. "Father had other ideas." "What about now?" Victor asked, carefully drying a plate. "If you could choose any path forward, what would it be?" It was a question Nora had never been asked before, what she wanted without limitations or expectations. She found herself both exhilarated and overwhelmed by the possibilities. "I'm not sure anymore," she admitted. "A week ago I thought I knew who I was and what I wanted, even if I couldn't have it. Now—" She glanced around the cozy kitchen at the man standing beside her. "Now I feel like I'm discovering parts of myself I never knew existed." Victor nodded, as if her uncertain answer made perfect sense. "Freedom does that, opens up possibilities you never considered when you were caged." "Were you ever caged?" Nora asked, curious about the insight behind his words. Victor was quiet for a moment, his hands stilling on the dish towel. "In my own way," he finally said. "Not by family, but by expectations, by the path I thought I had to follow." "What changed?" "Clara got sick," he said simply. Watching her fade away, knowing there was nothing I could do to save her, it made me realize how short life is, too short to live it according to someone else's plan. Nora felt the truth of his words resonate deep within her. "I wish I'd had that clarity before now." "Sometimes it takes a storm to clear your vision," Victor said, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her heart beat faster. For a moment, they stood facing each other, the air between them charged with unspoken possibility. Then Victor cleared his throat and stepped back, breaking the tension. "Getting late," he observed, hanging the towel to dry. "We should both get some rest." That night, Nora lay awake in the small bedroom, replaying the events of the day in her mind. Sheriff Patterson's visit had changed things, bringing the outside world crashing into the peaceful sanctuary she and Victor had created. Tomorrow or the next day, her father would make his next move. What form would it take, and how would she respond? More unsettling were her growing feelings for Victor. In less than a week, this quiet, thoughtful cowboy had shown her more respect and understanding than she'd experienced in years. She found herself drawn to his strength, his intelligence, the gentleness that belied his rugged exterior. But was what she feeling genuine affection, or merely gratitude for his rescue and protection? Sleep eluded her for hours as these questions circled in her mind. When she finally drifted off near dawn, her dreams were a confusing tangle of faces: her father's anger, her sister's fear, Victor's steady gaze offering sanctuary from the storm. The next morning brought a fresh challenge. Nora was in the kitchen preparing breakfast when she heard voices outside, multiple voices, male and female. Alarmed, she moved to the window and saw a wagon approaching, accompanied by two riders on horseback. With a shock, she recognized her father's gleaming black buggy and her younger sister Charlotte riding alongside. "Victor," she called urgently. He appeared from the direction of the barn, evidently having heard the approaching party as well. "I see them," he said grimly, entering the kitchen. "Your father doesn't waste time." "What should we do?" Nora asked, her heart racing. Victor's expression was calm, but she could see the tension in the set of his shoulders. "We face them together," he said. "Unless you'd prefer to speak with your family alone." Nora shook her head firmly. "Together." They moved to the porch just as the buggy drew up in front of the house. Judge Harrison Davis was an imposing figure, even seated tall, broad-shouldered, with iron-gray hair and piercing blue eyes that had intimidated countless defendants in his courtroom. Beside him sat Emma, Nora's youngest sister, her face pale and anxious. Charlotte dismounted from her horse, as did Reverend Simmons, the Presbyterian minister from Beaver. "Father," Nora acknowledged stiffly as the party approached the porch. "What brings you all this way?" Judge Davis's expression was thunderous. "You know perfectly well why I'm here, Nora. This disgraceful situation ends today." Victor stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Nora in a protective gesture that wasn't lost on anyone present. "Judge Davis, I presume." "I'm Victor Fairchild." "I know who you are," the judge snapped. "The drifter who's compromised my daughter's reputation." "Father," Charlotte exclaimed, clearly embarrassed by his bluntness. "Be silent, Charlotte," Davis commanded without looking at her. His gaze remained fixed on Victor. "I don't know what game you're playing, sir, but it ends now. Nora is returning home with us today." Nora moved to stand beside Victor, her chin raised defiantly. "I'm not going anywhere, Father. You made your position quite clear when you locked me out in a blizzard." Emma gasped from the buggy, her young face contorted with distress. "Is that true, Father? You said Nora ran away." Judge Davis's face darkened further. "This is not a discussion for public airing," he said through clenched teeth. "Nora, get in the buggy. Now." "No," Nora replied, the single word carrying the weight of years of suppressed defiance. "I'm 21 years old. You have no legal authority over me anymore." "Perhaps not," her father conceded with a dangerous smile, "but I do have considerable influence in this county. Influence that could make life very difficult for your host." Victor remained unmoved. "Are you threatening me, Judge Davis?" "Merely stating facts," Davis replied coldly. A man with your background should understand the value of choosing battles wisely. Reverend Simmons cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Perhaps we might all speak more calmly, he suggested. I'm sure there's a reasonable resolution to be found. There is, Judge Davis agreed. My daughter returns home, and Mr. Fairchild faces no consequences for his inappropriate behavior. What inappropriate behavior? Nora demanded. Mr. Fairchild saved my life when you cast me out. He's shown me nothing but respect and kindness. A young woman living unchaperoned with a single man is inappropriate by definition, her father replied dismissively. Reverend Simmons agrees, don't you, Reverend? Put on the spot, the minister shifted uncomfortably. The appearance of impropriety can be as damaging as impropriety itself, he offered diplomatically. There's a simple solution, Judge Davis continued, his tone softening slightly as he adopted what Nora recognized as his courtroom persuasion voice. You return home now, Nora. In a few days, when tempers have cooled, we can discuss your future more rationally. Councilman Elliott is still willing to consider the match despite this episode. I will never marry Councilman Elliott, Nora stated firmly. Not now, not ever. Her father's facade of reasonableness cracked. You ungrateful girl. Do you have any idea what you're throwing away? Security, position, respect. Respect. Nora interrupted, her voice rising. Is that what you call being sold to a man 3 times my age? Is that what Mother would have wanted for me? Don't you dare invoke your mother's name, Judge Davis thundered. She would be ashamed to see what you've become. Charlotte suddenly stepped forward. That's not true, she said, her voice trembling but determined. Mother always said Nora was the strongest of us all. That she had her own mind and we should be more like her. Judge Davis rounded on his middle daughter. You will be silent, Charlotte, or you'll find yourself in similar circumstances. Emma began to cry in the buggy, the tension overwhelming her sensitive nature. Victor, who had been watching the family drama unfold with increasing concern, finally spoke. Judge Davis, it's clear that emotions are running high. Perhaps it would be best if you returned to town and allowed everyone time to consider their positions more carefully. I don't need advice from a saddled tramp, Davis spat. Nora, this is your last chance. Come home now or consider yourself permanently cut off from this family. No support, no inheritance, not even your personal belongings. A leaden silence fell over the group. Nora felt as though she stood at a crossroads, each path stretching into a different future. Return to her father's house, submit to his will, eventually marry some man of his choosing, or step into the unknown, with nothing but her courage and determination to sustain her. I'm sorry, Emma. Charlotte, she said softly, looking at her sisters rather than her father. I hope someday you'll understand why I can't come back. Judge Davis's face hardened to granite. So be it. You are no longer my daughter. Do not attempt to contact your sisters or return to my property. He turned to Victor. And you, sir, you've made an enemy today that you cannot afford. With that, he climbed back into his buggy, barking at Charlotte to mount her horse. Emma's tear-streaked face looked back at Nora until they disappeared down the road, her expression a mixture of confusion and sorrow that tore at Nora's heart. When the dust from their departure had settled, Nora found herself trembling, the adrenaline of the confrontation draining away to leave hollow exhaustion in its wake. You didn't have to do that, Victor said quietly. Not for me. Nora looked up at him, suddenly aware that he had witnessed her family at their worst. I didn't do it for you, she replied honestly. I did it for me, because for the first time in my life I'm making my own choices. Victor studied her for a long moment, respect evident in his gaze. Your father's threats weren't empty, he warned. He'll do his best to make trouble for both of us." "I know," Nora acknowledged. "Are you sorry now that you opened your door to me that night?" Victor's answer came without hesitation. "Not for a single moment." The sincerity in his voice steadied her, a rock in the turbulent sea of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. She had just severed ties with her family, cast herself adrift from everything familiar. Yet somehow, standing on this porch beside this quiet, steadfast man, she felt not lost but found. "What happens now?" she asked. Victor gestured toward the house. "Now we go inside, have some breakfast, and figure out our next steps together." Together. The word carried a weight, a promise that resonated through Nora like the clear tone of a bell. She nodded, squared her shoulders, and followed him into the house that had become her sanctuary. True to Judge Davis's threat, the troubles began almost immediately. The next day, Victor rode into town for supplies and returned with news that the mercantile owner had refused to sell to him, claiming all accounts had been closed by order of the bank, a bank where Judge Davis sat on the board of directors. "It started," Nora said grimly when Victor reported this. "Father's using his influence to isolate us." Victor seemed more irritated than concerned. "Old Jameson at the mercantiles never liked me anyway," he said with a shrug. "There are other stores in Cedar City if needed, and I keep enough supplies on hand to weather worse than a petty embargo." But the pressure didn't stop at the mercantile. Over the next 2 weeks, it became clear that Judge Davis was methodically working to turn the community against them. The blacksmith suddenly remembered an urgent backlog of work when Victor brought a horse in for shoeing. The postmaster claimed their mail had been misplaced. Even the church seemed affected. Reverend Simmons sent a note suggesting it might be more comfortable for all concerned if they worshipped at home until the situation resolved. Through it all, Victor maintained a stoic calm that Nora found both admirable and occasionally frustrating. "Doesn't it make you angry?" she demanded one evening after he'd been turned away from yet another business in town. "They're treating you like a pariah because of me." Victor looked up from the book he was reading, his expression thoughtful. "It's not pleasant," he acknowledged, "but I learned long ago that other people's opinions matter far less than my own conscience. I know I've done nothing wrong. That's enough for me." "But your reputation, my reputation, has survived worse," he interrupted gently. "Besides, people have short memories. Once something more interesting comes along, they'll forget all about the scandalous cowboy and the judge's rebellious daughter." Despite his reassurances, Nora couldn't help feeling guilty. Victor had built a life here, modest but respectable, and her presence had disrupted it entirely. She began to wonder if she should leave after all, perhaps make her way to Salt Lake City, where she might find work as a teacher or clerk, far from her father's influence. These thoughts were preoccupying her one morning as she collected eggs from the henhouse. So absorbed was she in her internal debate that she didn't notice the approaching rider until they were nearly at the house. Startled, Nora peered around the corner of the henhouse to see Charlotte dismounting from her horse. Her sister looked around nervously, as if afraid of being observed. "Charlotte," Nora called, hurrying toward her with the basket of eggs still in hand. "What are you doing here?" Charlotte rushed to embrace her, nearly upsetting the basket. "Nora, I had to see you. Father thinks I'm at my friend Mary's house for a sewing circle." "If he discovers you've come here, I know," Charlotte interrupted, "but I couldn't bear it anymore. The house is so grim without you, and Father is—" She trailed off, her young face troubled. "Come inside," Nora urged, glancing toward the road. "Victor's checking fence lines, but he should be back soon." Once in the kitchen, Charlotte removed her bonnet and gloves, her eyes taking in the simple but tidy surroundings. "It's nice," she said, sounding surprised. "Cozy." "It is," Nora agreed, setting the eggs aside and putting the kettle on for tea. "Now tell me what's happening at home. How is Emma?" Charlotte's expression clouded. "She cries a lot. Father forbids us to mention your name, but she keeps your picture under her pillow." She hesitated, then added in a rush, "Father's arranged for me to marry next spring." Nora felt her blood run cold. "What? Charlotte, you're only 16. 17 by then," her sister corrected, as if that made it significantly better. "It's Mr. Holloway's son, Peter. He's 22 and will inherit his father's banking interests." "You want to marry him?" Nora asked, already knowing the answer from her sister's downcast eyes. Charlotte shrugged, the gesture painfully young. "He's handsome enough and not cruel. Father says I should be grateful for such an advantageous match." The echo of the same words that had been used to pressure Nora made her stomach clench. "Charlotte, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do," her sister interrupted, suddenly fierce. "I'm not brave like you, Nora. I can't defy Father and strike out on my own. Besides," she added more softly, "someone has to stay for Emma's sake." Nora felt tears prick her eyes at the unfairness of it all. "I'm sorry. I never meant to leave you both to face him alone." Charlotte reached across the table to squeeze her hand. "Don't be sorry. Seeing you stand up to him that day, it gave me courage I didn't know I had. And Emma too. We're finding small ways to be stronger." The kettle whistled, and Nora busied herself with preparing tea to hide her emotion. "What else has been happening?" she asked when she trusted her voice again. Charlotte proceeded to update her on town gossip, including the various rumors circulating about Nora and Victor. Some said he had kidnapped her during the storm. Others claimed they had been carrying on a secret affair for months. The most outlandish tales suggested Victor was actually a notorious outlaw who had enchanted Nora with promises of adventure and riches. "And what do you think?" Nora asked when Charlotte finished recounting these fantasies. Her sister studied her thoughtfully. "I think you look happier than I've seen you in years, and I think Mr. Fairchild must be a good man to risk Father's wrath for your sake." She hesitated, then asked with sisterly directness, "Do you love him?" The question caught Nora off guard. She had been so focused on the immediate challenges of their situation that she had scarcely allowed herself to examine the true nature of her feelings for Victor. I don't know," she admitted, feeling her cheeks warm. "It's all happened so quickly." Charlotte smiled, a knowing look beyond her years. "The way you say his name tells me all I need to know." Before Nora could respond, they heard the sound of a horse approaching. Charlotte tensed, but Nora recognized the rhythm of the hoofbeats. "It's all right," she assured her sister. "It's just Victor returning." Moments later, Victor entered the kitchen, stopping short at the sight of their visitor. "Miss Davis," he greeted Charlotte with a slight nod. "This is a surprise." Charlotte rose, suddenly shy in the presence of the man at the center of so much town gossip. "Mr. Fairchild, I hope my visit isn't unwelcome." "Any sister of Nora's is welcome here," Victor replied simply, removing his hat and hanging it by the door. "Though I suspect your father might have different feelings on the matter." "Father doesn't know I'm here," Charlotte admitted. "And I can't stay long. I just needed to see Nora and make sure she was truly all right." Victor's expression softened. "She's more than all right. Your sister is one of the strongest women I've ever met." The simple praise, delivered with such evident sincerity, brought a flush to Nora's cheeks. Charlotte caught the reaction and smiled faintly before turning serious once more. "Mr. Fairchild, there's something you should both know. Father has been meeting with the county prosecutor. I overheard them discussing possible charges against you." Victor's posture stiffened slightly, but his voice remained calm. "What kind of charges?" "I'm not entirely sure," Charlotte confessed. "They mentioned something about property disputes and cattle theft. Father seemed to think they could build a case. "That's absurd," Nora exclaimed. "Victor purchased this property legally. Everyone knows that." Victor's expression had grown thoughtful. "Your father's reaching," he said after a moment. "There were some questions about the property lines when I bought the place. Previous owner hadn't surveyed properly. But we resolved all that through the proper channels." He shook his head. "As for cattle theft, that's pure fabrication. I've never taken anything that wasn't rightfully mine." "Father doesn't care about the truth," Charlotte said quietly. "He just wants to punish you both. Especially you, Mr. Fairchild. He sees you as the reason Nora defied him." Victor's mouth quirked in a humorless smile. "I'm honored to be given so much credit for your sister's courage, but she made her own choices long before she met me." The praise warmed Nora again. Even in the midst of their troubling conversation, Charlotte rose reluctantly. "I should go. If I'm not at Mary's house by the time her mother serves lunch, someone might get suspicious." As they walked her to her horse, Charlotte hugged Nora tightly. "Be careful," she whispered. "Father won't give up easily." "Neither will we," Nora assured her. "Take care of yourself and Emma and Charlotte. Don't let Father force you into anything you truly don't want." With a nod and a last wave, Charlotte mounted her horse and rode away, the slight figure growing smaller against the vast landscape until she disappeared from view. Victor and Nora stood side by side, watching until the dust settled. "Your sister took a significant risk coming here," Victor observed. "She's braver than she knows," Nora replied, pride evident in her voice. "But I'm worried for her for both my sisters." Victor turned to face her directly. "Nora, we need to talk about what Charlotte said. Your father's threats are escalating. If he's involving the prosecutor, this could become serious." "He's bluffing," Nora insisted, though uncertainty gnawed at her. "He can't possibly make charges of theft stick when there's no evidence." "Evidence has been manufactured before," Victor said grimly. "Especially against men without standing or connections." The implication was clear. A former drover with no family and few local ties would make an easy target for a determined judge with a personal vendetta. "What should we do?" Nora asked, a familiar sense of dread settling in her stomach. Victor was silent for a long moment, his gaze distant. "I have friends in Colorado," he finally said. "People who knew me during my droving days. If things get bad enough, we could go there, make a fresh start." The suggestion stunned her. "Leave Utah, just abandon everything you've built here." Victor's expression was resolute. "A ranch is just land and buildings, Nora. It can be replaced. Some things are more important." The unspoken implication hung in the air between them. Some things some people were worth sacrificing for. "I won't let you lose everything because of me," Nora said firmly. "There must be another way." Victor's hand came up to touch her cheek, the gesture so gentle it made her breath catch. "We'll figure it out," he promised. "Together." That night, as a spring storm rolled in from the mountains, bringing gusting wind and driving rain to replace the winter's snow, Nora lay awake listening to the elements rage outside. The future seemed as turbulent and uncertain as the weather, with forces beyond her control threatening to uproot the tentative stability she had found. Yet beneath the anxiety lay something new and fragile: hope, growing stronger with each day spent in Victor's company. Hope not just for safety or survival, but for happiness, for love. The realization that she was falling in love with Victor Fairchild didn't come as a shock, but rather as a recognition of something that had been developing since that first night when he opened his door to a desperate stranger. His quiet strength, his unwavering integrity, his respect for her as an equal, these qualities had drawn her to him as surely as a compass points north. But was it fair to him? Her presence had brought nothing but trouble to his door. Because of her, he now faced social ostracism, economic hardship, and potentially legal persecution. How could she allow him to risk everything, possibly even his freedom, for her sake? By morning, Nora had made a decision. If her father was determined to destroy Victor through legal channels, she would remove the cause of his vindictiveness. She would leave, travel to Salt Lake City as they had discussed before, find work, and build a new life far from both her father's control and Victor's endangered ranch. The thought of leaving him was a physical pain in her chest, but she consoled herself with the knowledge that it was for his protection. Once she was gone, perhaps Judge Davis would relent in his campaign against Victor. With time, the townspeople would forget the scandal, and Victor could resume the peaceful life he had built before she disrupted it. Resolved on her course, Nora rose early and began to gather the few possessions she had accumulated during her stay, mostly clothes that Victor had purchased for her in Cedar City. When it became clear she would not be returning to her father's house, she was folding a simple calico dress when Victor appeared in the doorway of her room, his expression concerned. "You're packing," he observed, the statement carrying a weight of unasked questions. Nora couldn't meet his eyes. "I'm leaving for Salt Lake City. The morning stage passes through Beaver at 10 o'clock. "I see." Victor's voice was carefully neutral. "And were you planning to mention this to me before you departed?" Now she did look up, guilt washing over her at the hurt visible behind his calm facade. "I was going to leave a letter," she admitted. "I thought it would be easier." Easier for whom? There was an edge to his question that she had never heard before. "For both of us," Nora insisted, setting the dress aside and facing him directly. "Victor, my father is determined to destroy you because of me. If I leave, perhaps he'll relent." "And you decided this without consulting me?" Victor asked, his voice still controlled but with anger simmering beneath. "Without considering that I might have some say in the matter?" "I'm trying to protect you." "I don't recall asking for protection," Victor replied, his calm finally slipping. "Particularly not the kind that involves you disappearing from my life without so much as a goodbye." Nora felt tears threatening and fought them back. "What choice do I have? Stay and watch as my father systematically ruins everything you've worked for? How can I live with myself knowing I'm the cause of your suffering?" Victor stepped into the room, his expression softening from anger to something more complex. "Nora, look at me," he said quietly. When she did, he continued, "Since Clara died, I've been existing, not living. This house, this land, it was just a place to be. Then you arrived, and suddenly—" He paused, seeming to search for words. "Suddenly there was life here again. Laughter, purpose." The raw honesty in his voice made Nora's throat tighten. "Victor, let me finish," he interrupted gently. "I know what your father is capable of. I'm not naive about the risks, but those are my risks to choose, not yours to decide for me." He took a step closer. "If you want to leave because this isn't the life you want, I'll understand. I'll help you get to Salt Lake City or anywhere else you want to go. But don't leave because you think you're protecting me. I'd rather face your father's worst with you beside me than live safely without you." The words hung in the air between them, a declaration that wasn't quite a declaration, yet unmistakable in its implication. "I don't want to go," Nora admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "The thought of leaving you is—" She trailed off, unable to articulate the depth of her distress at the prospect. Victor closed the distance between them, his hands coming to rest lightly on her shoulders. "Then stay," he said simply. "Stay, and we'll face whatever comes together." Looking up into his earnest green eyes, Nora felt the last of her resolve crumble. How could she leave this man who had become the center of her world in such a short time? Who had shown her what it meant to be valued, respected, cherished for exactly who she was? "I'll stay," she promised, her voice steadying. "But we need a plan, Victor. My father won't stop until he gets what he wants, either me back under his control or you ruined, preferably both." Victor nodded, his hands still warm on her shoulders. "I've been thinking about that. There might be a way to resolve this, but it would involve a significant change for both of us." He hesitated, an uncharacteristic uncertainty crossing his features. "It's not how I would have chosen to do this, or when, but circumstances don't always allow for perfect timing." Nora's heart began to beat faster as she recognized the gravity in his expression. "What are you suggesting?" Instead of answering immediately, Victor released her shoulders and took a small step back. Then, to her astonishment, he lowered himself to one knee before her. "Nora Davis," he said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "I know we've known each other only a short while, but in that time, you've brought more joy and meaning to my life than I ever thought possible again. I'm not a wealthy man, and I can't offer you the luxury you were raised with, but I can promise to respect you, to stand by you, to build a life with you based on mutual trust and affection." He paused, drawing a deep breath. "Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Nora stood frozen, overwhelmed by the unexpected proposal. Her first instinct was to question his motives. Was this merely a practical solution to their predicament? A way to silence the gossip and thwart her father's interference? But looking into Victor's eyes, she saw none of the calculation such reasoning would require. Instead, she saw hope, vulnerability, and something deeper that made her heart race. "Are you asking because of my father?" she needed to know, her voice unsteady. "Because if this is just to protect me, I'm asking because I love you," Victor interrupted, the simple declaration stealing her breath. "The timing is influenced by our situation, yes. Under different circumstances, I might have waited longer, courted you properly. But my feelings are real, Nora. I think I've been falling in love with you since that first night, when you stood on my porch half frozen but still defiant." Tears sprang to Nora's eyes, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "I love you too," she whispered, the admission bringing with it a sense of rightness, of coming home. "Yes, Victor Fairchild, I will marry you." Victor's face transformed with a smile of such genuine happiness that it nearly broke Nora's heart. He rose and, with gentle reverence, drew her into his arms for the first time. Their kiss was tentative at first, then deepening with a certainty that confirmed the rightness of their decision. When they finally parted, Victor rested his forehead against hers. "I don't have a ring yet," he apologized. "This wasn't exactly planned." Nora laughed softly. "I don't need a ring, but I do need to know what happens next. My father won't simply accept our marriage and retreat gracefully." "No," Victor agreed, his expression growing more serious. "But as your husband, I'll have legal standing to protect you that I lack as merely your host." He smiled slightly at the inadequate term. "And while he might continue his campaign against me, he'll have a harder time making accusations of impropriety stick once we're married." "When?" Nora asked, practical considerations asserting themselves through her joy. "It takes time to arrange a wedding, and Reverend Simmons won't perform the ceremony without my father's blessing." Victor nodded, having clearly thought through these obstacles. "We'll go to Cedar City. I know a justice of the peace there who owes me a favor. We could be married by this time tomorrow, if you're certain." "I'm certain," Nora replied without hesitation. The speed of events might have alarmed her under different circumstances, but she felt only a deep conviction that this was right. "But what about after? Will we return here?" Victor's expression grew thoughtful. "Eventually, yes. This is our home, and I won't be driven from it by threats or gossip. But I think it might be wise to take a short trip after the wedding, perhaps to visit those friends in Colorado I mentioned." Give your father time to accept the inevitable. The plan was sound, addressing both their immediate safety and their long-term future. Yet Nora couldn't help feeling a pang of sadness that her sisters wouldn't witness her marriage, that despite the joy of finding love with Victor, the shadow of her father's anger would darken what should be an uncomplicated celebration. Victor, attuned to her emotions in a way that still surprised her, seemed to read her thoughts. I promise you, Nora, someday we'll have peace with your family. Not your father, perhaps some wounds run too deep for healing. But your sisters, they love you. Time and distance will create opportunities for reconciliation. His certainty comforted her. I hope you're right. I usually am, he replied with a slight smile. It's one of my more annoying qualities, as you'll discover over the years. Over the years. The phrase conjured images of a shared future that filled Nora with quiet joy. Mornings waking beside this man, building a home together, perhaps children someday. A life not defined by her father's expectations or society's constraints, but by their own choices and values. We should prepare to leave for Cedar City, she said, practical once more. If we're to be married tomorrow. Victor nodded but made no move to step away from her. Instead, he raised a hand to gently touch her cheek. Are you sure about this, Nora? Marriage is a lifetime commitment, and we've known each other such a short while. I don't want you to feel pressured by circumstances. His concern, so characteristic of his respect for her autonomy, only confirmed the rightness of her decision. I've never been more certain of anything, she assured him. In a few weeks, I've learned more about you, your character, your values, your heart than I knew about most people I've known all my life. I choose you, Victor Fairchild, not from necessity but from love. The certainty in her voice seemed to settle something in him. He nodded once, decisively, then kissed her again, a brief, sweet promise of all that awaited them. Then let's go get married, he said simply. They departed for Cedar City that afternoon, taking Victor's sturdy wagon rather than riding horseback to accommodate the few possessions they were bringing. The journey would take several hours, putting them in town by evening. They would stay at a hotel, overnight separate rooms. Victor insisted with old-fashioned propriety that made Nora smile and seek out the justice of the peace in the morning. As they traveled, the late spring landscape unfolding around them in vibrant greens and golds, Nora felt a growing sense of liberation. Each mile that passed took her further from her father's influence and closer to a new life of her own making. The future stretched before her, uncertain in its details, but secure in its foundation, the love of the quiet, steadfast man beside her. Cedar City welcomed them with the impersonal hospitality of a town unaware of their history. No one looked twice at the respectably dressed couple checking into the hotel. No whispers followed them as they dined in the small restaurant nearby. The anonymity was refreshing after weeks of being the center of Beaver's most scandalous gossip. That night, alone in her hotel room, Nora reflected on the extraordinary turn her life had taken. Just weeks ago, she had been a dutiful if rebellious daughter, living under her father's roof, her future prescribed and constrained. Now she stood on the precipice of marriage to a man she had come to love with an intensity that sometimes frightened her, about to begin a life she could scarcely have imagined before the blizzard that had changed everything. Was she moving too quickly? The question surfaced briefly, but was quickly dismissed. In a world that had offered her so few choices, the chance to follow her heart, to choose a path based on love rather than obligation or fear, felt not impulsive but inevitable. Like a river finally finding its natural course after years of diversion. Morning arrived with clear skies and a sense of purpose. Nora dressed with care in her best outfit, a blue calico dress that Victor had purchased for her in one of the Cedar City shops during an earlier visit. It wasn't the wedding gown she might once have envisioned, but as she secured the last button and surveyed her reflection, she found she didn't mind. What mattered was not the trappings but the substance of the commitment she was about to make. A knock at her door signaled Victor's arrival. When she opened it, she found him similarly dressed in his best, a clean shirt and vest, his usually unruly hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. The effort he had made touched her deeply. "You look beautiful," he said simply, his eyes warm with admiration. "As do you," she replied, smiling at the slight flush her compliment brought to his cheeks. They made their way to the justice of the peace's office, a small, plain room in the town's modest courthouse. Justice Samuel Morgan was a balding man in his 60s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. He greeted Victor with evident pleasure. "Fairchild, it's been too long. When I heard you'd settled down with a ranch in Beaver, I could scarcely believe it." The Victor Fairchild I knew was never one for putting down roots. Victor smiled, clasping the older man's hand firmly. "People change, Sam, especially when they have good reason to." He turned to Nora, his expression softening. "This is Nora Davis, soon to be Nora Fairchild, if you're willing to help us make it official." Justice Morgan's shrewd eyes assessed Nora, not unkindly. "Miss Davis, a pleasure to meet you. I assume you're entering into this marriage of your own free will." "Absolutely," Nora confirmed, her voice steady. "Nothing would make me happier." The justice nodded, satisfied. "Very well. We'll need witnesses. My clerk can serve as one, but we'll need another." "I took the liberty of asking the hotel proprietor's wife," Victor said. "She should be along shortly." True to his word, Mrs. Henderson from the hotel arrived moments later, a plump, cheerful woman who admitted she had a soft spot for weddings and was delighted to assist. With all the necessary parties assembled, Justice Morgan began the simple ceremony. The words were traditional and straightforward promises to love, honor, and cherish, to stand together through good times and bad, in sickness and in health, until death parted them. Yet as Nora repeated her vows, looking into Victor's earnest green eyes, the familiar phrases took on new depth and meaning. This was not just a legal contract or a social convention, but a sacred covenant between two souls who had found in each other something worth protecting at all costs. "By the authority vested in me by the territory of Utah," Justice Morgan concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride, Fairchild." Victor's kiss was gentle but possessive, acclaiming that Nora welcomed with her whole heart. When they parted, his smile was radiant, a pure joy that mirrored her own. "Congratulations to you both," Justice Morgan said, signing the marriage certificate with a flourish. "May your union be blessed with happiness and prosperity." Mrs. Henderson dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. "So romantic," she sighed. "Eloping to Cedar City, just like something from a novel." Nora and Victor exchanged amused glances at this characterization of their hastily arranged wedding, necessitated by circumstances far from romantic fiction. Yet there was something undeniably fitting about the simplicity of their union, no elaborate ceremony or expensive trappings. Just two people committing their lives to one another, with honest words and open hearts. After thanking their witnesses, and collecting their marriage certificate, a document that would prove crucial in the days to come, they departed the courthouse as husband and wife. The spring sun shone brilliantly, casting long shadows across the town square as they walked hand in hand toward the hotel. "Well, Mrs. Fairchild," Victor said, the new name clearly pleasing him, "what would you like to do with the rest of our wedding day?" We could start for Colorado this afternoon, or remain in Cedar City another night. Nora considered the question, suddenly aware of the anticipation building within her. Tonight would be their wedding night, a thought that brought both nervousness and excitement. Let's stay, she decided. One more night before we begin our journey. Victor nodded, understanding the unspoken reason for her choice. I'll make the arrangements, he said, squeezing her hand gently. They spent the afternoon exploring Cedar City, window shopping, and enjoying a freedom they had not experienced in Beaver, where every movement had been observed and judged. Victor purchased a simple gold band for Nora from a jeweler's shop, not an engagement ring, which would have been beyond their means, but a wedding band to formalize their union. It should have been part of the ceremony, he apologized as he slipped it onto her finger outside the shop. But I wanted you to choose one you liked. It's perfect, Nora assured him, admiring the slender band that now encircled her finger, a tangible symbol of their commitment. As evening approached, they dined at the best restaurant in town, a modest establishment by city standards, but offering better fare than they could expect on the trail to Colorado. The meal was a celebration, with Victor insisting on a bottle of wine to mark the occasion. To new beginnings, he proposed, raising his glass to hers. And to finding home in unexpected places, Nora added, the double meaning clear in her eyes as she met his gaze over the rim of her glass. Later, as they approached their hotel room, a single room now, the thought both thrilling and intimidating, Nora felt a flutter of nervousness. Her mother had died before having the talk that traditionally preceded a daughter's wedding night, and her father had certainly never addressed such matters. Her knowledge of marital intimacy was limited to vague allusions in novels and whispered half-truths from schoolgirls. Victor must have sensed her apprehension as he unlocked the door. "Nora," he said softly, "we don't have to. That is, I understand if you need time. Marriage is an adjustment, and we've had precious little time to prepare for any of this." His consideration touched her deeply. "I'm just a little nervous," she admitted, grateful for his understanding. "But I don't want to wait. We're husband and wife now." Victor's smile was tender as he opened the door and, to her surprise, scooped her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. "An old custom," he explained at her startled laugh, "for good luck in the marriage." Inside, he set her gently on her feet, his hands lingering at her waist. "We have all night," he reminded her softly. "There's no rush," and there wasn't. With infinite patience and tenderness, Victor initiated Nora into the mysteries of physical love, his touch reverent, his words reassuring. What might have been awkward or frightening became, instead, a natural extension of the bond they had been forming since that snowy night when he had opened his door to her, a deepening of trust, an expression of love in its most intimate form. Afterward, lying in his arms as the moon cast silver light across the bed, Nora felt a profound sense of peace. This man, this life, they were her choice, freely made. Whatever challenges awaited them on their return to Beaver or in Colorado, they would face them together, strengthened by the commitment they had made to one another. "What are you thinking?" Victor murmured, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. Nora smiled, snuggling closer to his warmth. "That I never imagined being locked out in a blizzard would lead to the greatest happiness I've ever known." Victor's arms tightened around her, his lips brushing her forehead. "You belong here," he whispered, echoing the words he had spoken on that first night. "With me, always." And as sleep claimed them both, Nora knew with bone-deep certainty that he was right. She had found her true home not in a place, but in the heart of the man who had seen her worth from the beginning, who had valued her spirit rather than trying to tame it, who had opened not just his door but his life to her when she needed it most. The journey to Colorado began the next morning, their few possessions packed in Victor's wagon, the future stretching before them like the open road. They would face challenges in the days and years to come. Judge Davis's continued animosity, the struggle to establish their ranch against economic pressure, the normal trials of building a life together. But on that bright spring morning, with the man she loved beside her and his ring on her finger, Nora Fairchild looked toward the horizon not with fear but with anticipation. The storm that had nearly claimed her life had instead delivered her to a love stronger than she could have imagined, a love that would weather whatever storms lay ahead, secure in the knowledge that they had found in each other the home they were always meant to share. 10 years later, the Fairchild Ranch stood as one of the most prosperous in Beaver County. The modest house had expanded to accommodate their growing family: 8-year-old Clara, named for Victor's sister; 6-year-old Henry, who had his father's thoughtful nature; and 3-year-old twins James and Joseph, bundles of energy who kept everyone on their toes. Judge Harrison Davis had never formally reconciled with his eldest daughter, maintaining his public position that she had brought shame to the family name. But time had softened some of the harder edges of the conflict. Charlotte, now married with children of her own, visited regularly, bringing her family to spend summers at the ranch. Even Emma, who had finally married a kind shopkeeper from Salt Lake City at the age of 23, maintained correspondence with Nora despite their father's disapproval. The town of Beaver had long since moved past the scandal of the judge's daughter and the solitary rancher. New gossip had replaced the old, and the Fairchilds' evident prosperity and happiness had gradually earned them, if not universal friendship, at least general respect in the community. On the 10th anniversary of the blizzard that had brought them together, Victor and Nora stood on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard as the sun set behind the mountains. Victor's arm rested comfortably around Nora's waist, a familiar and cherished weight. "Do you ever regret it?" Nora asked softly, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Taking in a half-frozen stranger that night, all the trouble it brought you?" Victor looked down at her, the laugh lines around his eyes deepening as he smiled. "Not for a single moment," he replied, the same answer he had given her a decade earlier when she'd asked a similar question. "Best decision I ever made." Nora raised her face for his kiss, still feeling after all these years the same thrill at his touch. "Mine too," she whispered against his lips. "Coming home to you." And as they called their children in for supper, the family they had built together gathering around the table in the warm, lamp-lit house, Nora reflected on the strange and wonderful journey that had led her here. From desperation to belonging, from isolation to love, from a cold winter night to the warmth of a life, shared a journey that had begun with a simple act of kindness when a cowboy opened his door and his heart, saying the words she would never forget: "You belong here."